When the class of 1941 was at Regis, the school celebrated a number of important milestones. As freshmen, the 1941 boys would commemorate the 200th anniversary of the canonization of the school's namesake, John Francis Regis. 2 years later, Regis would celebrate its Silver Jubilee during their junior year. On November 28, 1939, a week after Thanksgiving, over 500 alumni and friends would gather at the old Hotel Astor to celebrate the 25th anniversary of Regis's founding. Leading up to the festivities, the Alumni Association donated a mural at Regis. The mural was erected in the south corridor of the school, which was named the Alumni Hall. Planning and coordination of the mural was led by the ever-industrious Father Gabriel Zema. The Silver Jubilee was also when the Student Council was first initiated. It would allow Regis boys a greater voice and role in school. At the start of the class of 1941 senior year, Regis would join Jesuit institutions around the world to mark the quadricentennial of the establishment of the Jesuit Society. For the students themselves, there were other traditions that were more directly relatable, such as retreats.
Basically, for an entire week, the juniors would be out and the seniors would be out. The retreats would be 3 days long, and we would go to, half the year would go to one place and half the year would go to another place. There were Jesuit retreat houses or the seminary, and we would go there for our retreat. And these would be preached retreats. They would not be like the Quest or the Emmaus retreats. These would be a priest would come in and you'd get 3 or 4 talks a day, basically silence in the house, silence at meals and so on. There'd be a little rec period on the one day you'd go out and run around and throw footballs or something, but basically otherwise you were on silence for the whole time.
Each fall, the 1941 boys would embark on their annual 3-day retreat in mid-October. On the Friday at the end of the retreat, the school would organize an outing for fun and relaxation. In recent years, the big fall trip would be to Bear Mountain. But in those earlier decades, Regis boys would take the bus up to Kaiser Island off Norwalk, Connecticut, where the Jesuit Society owned a retreat house. Attendance was not mandatory, but it was a popular event. Today, Kaiser Island has been renamed Manresa Island after the now closed Jesuit center there. Kaiser Island has a bit of a tainted history. Before it was acquired by the Jesuits, it was owned by John Kaiser. In the mid-1800s, he was part of a notorious gang called the Tweed Ring, run by the disgraced Senator William Tweed. The gang would embezzle the equivalent of several $billion today from the New York City budget. The group was eventually caught, and it was reported that Kaiser Island was where the ring would meet to hatch their plans. During the time Regis would go to Kaiser Island, rumors had spread amongst the boys of the island being haunted by old gang members. There were stories of hearing the sound of pool being played in empty rooms, and sightings of the ghosts of Kaiser and Tweed in buildings. Over time, exploring abandoned areas and structures became a part of the fun during those trips to Kaiser Island, with the Regis boys perhaps being emboldened after their 3-day spiritual retreat. The traditional Bear Mountain outing was the day Regians looked forward to most in the 1930s. Unlike today when the Bear Mountain trip is held in the fall, back then it was organized in the spring in late May. It was scheduled to celebrate the end of the last marking period of the year, which made the trip especially joyous. And though in present day the journey is made by bus, in the early decades the route to Bear Mountain was by day cruises up the Hudson River. The boat would depart from the west side or Battery Place Pier in Manhattan at 10 a.m. It took about 2 to 3 hours for the boat to make the trip to Bear Mountain just in time for a picnic lunch. On the ride up, the boys were able to take in views and fresh air in mid-spring that would be a change of pace from their routines in the city. The Regis boys would actually spend as much time on the river as they would at Bear Mountain. Arguably, it was the river cruise that was actually the highlight of the day. The school would hire a band to provide entertainment, often supplemented by the Regis Orchestra and choir. There were dances on board as well. Starting in the class of 1941's freshman year, Regis boys were allowed to bring dates to Bear Mountain. Family members were also invited. At Bear Mountain, Regians have the entire afternoon to pursue various activities or just to lounge around. There are the usual staff versus student challenges, sports events, hikes, and time to generally goof around and have fun. However, in the 1930s, there was one activity that was specifically forbidden by the principal, Father Dan Burke: swimming. It emanated from a painful personal experience. As a student at Regis 2 decades earlier, Father Burke was asked by the school's prefect of discipline to accompany him to the home of a classmate who drowned during a school outing to Kaiser Island. Father Burke never forgot that tragedy, and as a result, was adamant that boys not be allowed to swim at Bear Mountain. When one boy defied the order, Father Burke had him dismissed from Regis. Overall, Bear Mountain Day was one of the major events at Regis in that era. It was a day of revelry that was the culmination of a busy academic year. The return boat journey would begin at sundown around 7 p.m., but that would only be the start of the evening entertainment on the cruise back. Bear Mountain Day in those days was a long affair. By the time the boat docked back in Manhattan, it was often 11 o'clock at night.